2025 is a great time to build a PC or do a PC upgrade, with a new generation of graphics cards launching from AMD, NVIDIA, and even Intel. But you can destroy your gaming PC performance if you buy the wrong PC parts for a new build or keep the wrong parts in a PC upgrade. Welcome back to PC Builder, I'm Jason. In this video, we're going to cover the PC parts that you should avoid buying in 2025 for a new build or get rid of in your existing PC build during an upgrade. And we'll tell you what to buy instead. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like, it makes a huge difference to the channel, and of course subscribe for more cool PC content. Let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by VIP SSD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows licenses and that terrible Activate Windows watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SSD Key and get a Windows 10 or 11 OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 30% off during their Black Friday sale. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom! Windows is fully licensed for a crazy low price. And Windows 10 can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. And they have Microsoft Office licenses too. Use the links in the video description. Let's talk about graphics cards to avoid in 2025. With tons of new GPUs launching in 2025, the biggest issue continues to be graphics cards with only 8GB of VRAM, like the RTX 4060 and RX 7600. I keep hearing people make excuses about these graphics cards like, oh, but it's got DLSS, or I only play competitive titles where I turn down the settings to low anyway. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is no excuse for graphics cards with only 8GB of VRAM in 2025 above $200 in price. As most of us know by now, many games, even at 1080p, run out of VRAM. That's the video RAM on your graphics card, not the amount of system RAM that you have. The result is either that the game stutters horribly or just looks terrible as it stops loading new textures. And in 2025, it's going to get a lot worse. Consoles have had access to more than 8GB of VRAM for years at this point. Game developers, they just aren't going to spend as much time optimizing their games to run that well for PCs that only have 8GB of VRAM. So expect a lot more new games going beyond that 8GB VRAM buffer. So just say no to any GPU above $200 that only has 8GB of VRAM, like the RTX 4060 Ti, RTX 4060, RTX 3050, RX 7600, or 6650 XT. This goes double for new graphics card releases. In 2025, I recommend at least 10GB of VRAM for 1080p gaming, so those RTX 3080 10GB GPUs, along with the new Intel B570 GPU, are okay for now. And at least 12GB of VRAM for 1440p rasterized performance, though I would prefer 16GB if possible, though price is important as well. In 2025, I certainly would not pay more than $400 US for any graphics card with only 12GB of VRAM. For ray tracing at 1440p or for 4K gaming, the minimum, it's really 16GB of VRAM. Unfortunately, for a lot of you who upgraded just a couple years ago with an RTX 3060 Ti, RTX 3070, or even RTX 3080 10GB GPU, that means your card is increasingly bottlenecked by VRAM, and you'll have to turn down those settings. Those in older graphics cards are the ones that I would look to upgrade in 2025. Luckily, we already have some GPUs around $250 to $300 with more VRAM, like the Intel Arc B580 12GB and the RX 7600 XT 16GB GPUs, along with some older models like the 6700 XT and 6750 XT 12GB, and even the RTX 3060 12GB, but the 3060 is getting quite slow in 2025. And we're hoping AMD and NVIDIA will add to that list with upcoming 2025 graphics card launches. Believe it or not, your existing PC might be the part that you should avoid in 2025, even if you own something like a Ryzen 5800X 3D with an older motherboard. With new graphics cards launching, so many folks are planning to drop in a shiny new GPU into their existing systems, but that might be a huge mistake if that system is limited to PCIe Gen 3. This is because AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel have been skimping on manufacturing costs for their graphics cards in the budget and increasingly mid-range GPUs. The connector at the bottom of the GPU has 16 pins, what we call BY16, and which is abbreviated as X16 when you look on a spec sheet. But to save money, many budget and even mid-range GPUs are now made so that only half of these pins actually work, what we call BY8 or X8 on a spec sheet. This means many GPUs only use half of the PCIe lanes on the GPU connector, and they rely on you having at least PCIe Gen 4 speed to make up the difference. So while an RTX 4090 runs just fine on PCIe Gen 3, using the full BY16 GPU connector, Even an RTX 4060 loses about 10% of its FPS in some games on PCIe Gen 3 because it uses the by-8 connection. This has been a thing for a little while with very budget GPUs, but it increasingly impacts mid-range GPUs like the RX 7600 XT, RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, and some models of the RX 7800 XT like the Acer Nitro version. So before you buy that new shiny graphics card for your existing PC, you'll want to double check whether or not your system is fully capable of running at PCIe Gen 4, and if it isn't, then you're going to want to see whether that graphics card that you're going to buy uses a by-8 or by-16 connection. You can do this by looking it up in TechPowerUp's GPU database under bus bandwidth. But note there are some GPUs like the RX 7800 XT where even though the database lists the bus width at by 16, which is what most of them run at, there are a couple models manufactured by Acer where only by 8. And I can't even find this on the Acer specifications page any longer, though Newegg does list it right up front in the GPU description box. But the reality is that the best thing that you can do, make sure your PC runs at least on PCIe Gen 4 speed. If you have a PCIe Gen 4 CPU, but your motherboard is limited to PCIe Gen 3, and this is the case for a lot of you that did a drop-in upgrade to a Ryzen 5800X3D or maybe 5700X3D on an older Ryzen system with a 300 or 400 series motherboard like an X470 or B350, or an A series board, then the thing to do is to upgrade that motherboard to a B550 on Ryzen. Just avoid the MSI B550 Gaming Gen 3, which is only PCIe Gen 3, basically a B450 in disguise. And if you are on an older CPU that's only PCIe Gen 3, it's likely your CPU is also going to bottleneck your new GPU because it's slow, as well as limited to PCIe Gen 3, so it's time for a brand new build. And it's time to put down the Ryzen 5500, 5600G, 5700 non-X APU-based processors that, despite the very similar naming to Zen 3-based Ryzen 5000 CPUs like the 5600 and 5700X, only support PCIe Gen 3. Did you think that the AM5 platform was safe from bad CPUs? Think again. Let's talk about those Ryzen 8000 series APUs like the Ryzen 8500G and their weird versions that have the integrated graphics disabled like the Ryzen 8400F. These AM5 APUs are so cheap, a lot of people think, hey, I found the golden ticket to the AM5 platform for less than a Ryzen 7600X or even 7500F. Unfortunately, what they found is a trap. Despite sounding like they're better than the Ryzen 7000 series CPUs, bigger number better, right? These are totally different architecture than the Ryzen 7000 or 9000 series CPUs. Ryzen 8000 series APUs were designed with a heavy emphasis on the integrated GPU and with a neural processing unit or NPU focused on AI performance. These APUs have less than half the amount of L3 cache as the Ryzen 7000 or 9000 series CPUs. Remember that cache is really good for gaming, so having less is bad. And their integrated graphics, it just isn't powerful enough to do anything other than really low settings at 1080p. But the worst is that some of them have extremely limited GPU PCIe bandwidth, down to only 4 out of the 16 lanes in some cases. That makes them unusable for a gaming PC. So my strong advice, stay as far away from them as you can get. Intel CPUs are also a serious challenge right now. 12th gen is fine for budget systems, but 13th and 14th generation Intel CPUs with TDPs of 65 watts or higher, so pretty much every desktop CPU except the i3 ones, had degradation issues in 2024, meaning they were dying for seemingly no reason. Intel found a number of issues with them, much of it related to overvolting issues in Intel's microcode that controls the CPU function. Intel has since released BIOS updates that they say will fix these CPUs, but without further evidence, it's really hard to recommend them in 2025. And since they're on an older platform with no future upgrades anyway, it makes it doubly hard to recommend them for anything other than a budget build. So if those CPUs go on like super fire sale, maybe take a look. Otherwise, I'd skip them in 2025. Now, Intel did launch their Arrow Lake-based CPUs called their Intel Core Ultra 200 series, and we're likely going to get lower TDP locked versions very soon. While the Z890 motherboard platform was nothing short of amazing, and I mean like really, really good, the problem was that the CPUs were a buggy, underperforming mess at launch. Now, Intel says they're going to fix them in early 2025 and they're going to roll out some kind of fixed demonstration. So fingers crossed that we're actually going to be able to recommend those CPUs in 2025 and have some real competition. That leaves the Ryzen 9000 series non-X3D CPUs like the Ryzen 9600X and 9700X. They were only about 5% faster than the Ryzen 7000 series counterparts at a massive price premium, and they were basically dead on arrival in 2024. Typically, AMD introduces non-X versions of these CPUs and lowers the price at CES, so if that happens, they still might be good value. But to be honest, I'd hesitate to buy one for much more than the Ryzen 7000 series counterparts. So get busy, AMD, and start cutting some prices on Ryzen 9000. Let's talk about the #1 mistake so many people make with a new PC build, but also with PC upgrades. That is massively overspending on their SSD speed at the expense of upgrading more important features, or even just getting more SSD storage. Despite years of claims that direct storage technologies will revolutionize gaming performance by finally taking advantage of faster SSD speeds like PCIe Gen 3, Gen 4, and the newest Gen 5 drives, we've seen absolutely no benefit in the handful of titles that use direct storage technology. A SATA SSD, it still gives us the same FPS in gaming as the fastest PCIe Gen 5 NVMe SSD. And while some claim that loading times are massively improved, in testing, we're talking about a second or two at most. But despite this, I keep seeing people buying bad SSDs that don't work for them, like expensive Samsung 990 Pro for more than double the cost of a Gen 3 or a Gen 4 budget NVMe SSD would cost. That means they're paying $120 for 1 terabyte for a Samsung 990 Pro instead of paying about $90 for 2 terabytes of storage with a great budget NVMe SSD like the Silicon Power UD90. Yes, the Samsung 990 Pro, it's better for professional video editors or workstation users, but for everybody else, double up on that storage and you're still saving an extra $30 to throw in a better GPU, CPU, RAM, or anything else you want. And while pricing for Gen 3 and Gen 4 NVMe SSDs is largely the same, right now it's about $50 per terabyte in the US. Don't overspend on ridiculous Gen 5 NVMe SSD speeds that you'll never see any benefit from. The other major storage issue that I see all the time, it's hard drives. In 2025, I want almost all of you to forget that these hard drives even exist. As now is the case where NVMe SSDs are almost as cheap, and there's a massive performance difference between SSDs and traditional spinning hard drives. And every time I say this, there's always that one person typing down in the comments, but Jason, there's this one really niche use case for hard drives that are still good. That person is allowed to buy a hard drive for their very specific use case, and everybody else who just wants to build a gaming PC, please just forget they ever existed and grab an NVMe SSD instead. Let's talk about bad motherboards in 2025 that you absolutely need to avoid. I will say that generally, motherboard quality is pretty good in 2025, especially when it comes to things like the amount of rear panel USB connectivity, the added in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, the stronger VRAMs, and the increased number of M.2 NVMe SSD drive slots. In 2025, we have some great toolless building features coming as well, like easy and toolless removal of NVMe SSD heatsinks and even NVMe installation, GPU release buttons you can actually get to, and a host of other builder-friendly features. We even see some motherboards bringing back LED postcode readouts, which is a feature that I think every mid-range and higher-end board should have. But there are also some really bad motherboards coming in 2025. Let's start with AMD's upcoming B840 motherboards. These are limited to PCIe Gen 3 bandwidth, including for the GPU slot. Remember that earlier discussion we had about how cost-cutting measures on new budget mid-range GPUs by AMD and NVIDIA were killing off PCIe Gen 3 systems? Well, what better product to introduce in 2025 than a shiny new AM5 motherboard for your Ryzen 7600 or 9600X that's going to destroy your GPU performance? That's me doing sarcasm, obviously. Don't buy B840 motherboards when they come out. I don't even know why these are coming out, and I certainly won't be recommending them in 2025. However, in 2025 for AM5, Ryzen 7000 and 9000 series CPUs, most of you want to get a B650 or B850 motherboard. These are the exact same chipset, by the way. And for creators needing additional storage or USB connectivity, the X670E and X870E motherboards, again, same chipset, will generally have additional production features that you need. We'll have more on our upcoming Best Ryzen motherboard video for 2025. Here's an honorable mention for something that's going to drive me absolutely crazy in 2025 during our Boost My Build series, where we take your PC build list, we tear them up, we put them back together, and we massively increase your performance. And that's People who spend way too much on their PC case, especially ones by big name brands like Lee & Lee, Corsair, NZXT, and others. Then they try and squeeze the actual PC build into the rest of their tiny budget. Remember, at most you want to spend about 10% of your PC budget on your case, at most, and you can get some great ones starting around $60 like this. You're looking for at least 2 intake and 1 exhaust fan, and the fan should be included in the total cost of the case. To help you out, I'm going to link a 3-pack of Thermalright fans in white or black with ARGB and PWM for just about $15, which is insane, and they perform really well for budget fans. Hey, let me know down in the comments, what PC parts do you think should be avoided in 2025 and why? Of course, if you got value out of this video, please give it a like as it really helps out the channel, and of course subscribe for more cool PC content like our build guide for the Intel B580 GPU, including differences in stock and aftermarket models, the best CPUs to combo with it, and a full $650 and $850 build list. Check it out, and I'll catch you on the next one.